All right, guys. So today we're focusing on the rule breakers. Okay, so this is considered non-Mendelian genetics. If you remember me talking about Gregor Mendel, the father of genetics, he is the one that experimented with pea plants in his garden, right? And he was the one that came up with the dominant recessive patterns of inheritance and figured out that you receive, if you receive a dominant allele from the parent, that it's going to override the recessive. And the only way for the recessive phenotype to show is if you are homozygous recessive for that trait. So I just have a fun little meme here because when I was looking at Gregor Mendel over here, it reminded me of my favorite show, Dwight from The Office. But today we're going to be looking at the rule breakers. So the ones that do not follow that dominant and recessive pattern of inheritance. Now, remember, flowers reproduce sexually. So that is how Mendel was able to experiment with them. Remember, the pollen is the sperm of the flower, where the fruit is the egg. So bees, what they do is they spread, they're pollinators, so they spread the pollen around, and then what they will do is they make the offspring that they make would be the seed that grows into the new plant. Okay, so again, just take a look at the dominant traits for pea plants compared to the recessives, and that is all what Mendel experimented with. Okay, so today we're going to be looking at flowers as well. So I just want you to make some observations about sweet peas, camellias, and snapdragons, different types of flowers. So take a second and look at that. Okay, so you might have noticed that all the females in this case are red, which is correct, and all the males are white. Now take a look at the offspring, and I want you to think about what type of pattern of inheritance are they displaying. Okay, so this just looks like dominant versus recessive pattern of inheritance. And which one would be dominant? The red flower, very good. In this case, what do you think this would be an example of? If we cross a red and a white and end up with offspring like this? Very good. That would be an example of codominance because both phenotypes are displayed. And then in this third case, what would this one be? Very good. This would be incomplete dominance because you have a mixture or a blending in the offspring and a third new phenotype is created. Now, for I just already explained all that for you, so we'll just skip over that part. So now we're going to watch a little video.
What do snapdragons, human height, and speckled chickens have in common? Well, they are easily identified as non-Mendelian traits. By non-Mendelian, we mean that, genetically, they are rule breakers. They don't follow the regular Mendelian rule that having a dominant allele means the dominant trait will show. Remember in our guinea pig video, having a dominant allele represented by a capital H meant that the guinea pig would have hair? Only if there was no dominant present, a genotype of little h, would there be a hairless guinea pig. Well, that's a Mendelian trait, but what we're going to cover now is when these traits are non-Mendelian and they don't follow these basic rules. So let's first start by snapdragons. We confess that when we heard this word, we thought they were some really amazing kind of creature. Well, they are amazing, but they're flowers, so I don't know, that's not exactly what we envisioned. Well, in snapdragon genetics, there can be three phenotypes: red, white, or something in between, pink. It's called incomplete dominance. In incomplete dominance, the dominant allele is not completely expressed when the recessive allele is around. There isn't really a clear dominant allele. If you cross a red flower, and we're going to write it here big R, and a white flower, little r, you are going to get offspring that are big R, little r. But unlike a Mendelian trait, if this is incomplete dominance, that big R allele is not completely expressed when the little r is around. So big R, little r in this case is pink. If you cross two pink flowers, big R, little r, like shown in this Punnett square here, you can get offspring that are red, white, or pink. Incomplete dominance is different from codominance. Codominance, like a co-worker, that prefix co should make you think together. They work together. The alleles, that is. For that reason, we like to use different letters entirely to represent the alleles. There is a codominance involving color in some types of chickens. Take a look at this Punnett square. If you cross a black chicken, represented here by BB, and a white chicken, represented here by WW, all the offspring here are BW. BW chickens are both black and white. They're speckled. See, both traits show up. This is the essence of codominance. And you know, what's more awesome than a speckled chicken? Well, except for those silky bantam chickens. By the way, you will find that many people use different formatting for incomplete dominance and codominance. Some people like to use different letters entirely for incomplete dominance, and some people don't. Some people also prefer to do exponents with codominance, and some people don't. Formatting aside, when you're solving these Punnett squares, since we find this really does vary from classroom to classroom, the real concept is that in incomplete dominance, one allele is not completely dominant over the other, so you see this almost in-between phenotype. In codominance, both alleles are expressed. It's the application that matters here. Height is fascinating. In our immediate family, Pinky is taller than Petunia. Our mom is also taller than Petunia. So how does that happen? There isn't just one height gene. There's a lot of genes that determine your height. What I mean by that is that you don't just have a pair of alleles, like big A, that will code for your height. It's more like someone having a genotype of big A, big B, big C, little c, and maybe more genes to ultimately determine your height. And you inherit one allele for each of the height genes from each parent. All of these genes work together to determine your height. Your skin color is also determined by many genes, just like your height. These are called polygenic traits. Poly means many, so many genes coding for one trait is what polygenic means. By the way, both height and skin color can be influenced by environmental factors as well. Nutrition growing up can affect your height, just as spending a lot of time in the sun can affect your skin color. However, this doesn't change the genetics for this trait. And finally, one more thing that we want to talk about. Epistasis. Epistasis is when one gene really depends on another gene for it to even be expressed. I mean, it really depends on this other gene. So let's pick an animal like, a llama. Let's say this llama has a dominant big B allele, which means its wool will be black. So big B, or big B, little b means that it will have black wool. And let's say that if a llama has a pair of recessive alleles, little b, then it will have brown wool. Now, what if there is another gene that controls whether this pigment will even be expressed in the llama in the first place? In this hypothetical example, a llama could have this other gene coded for by big C, little c, or little c in its genotype. However, if a llama has the genotype little c, it will not allow the other gene for wool color to even be expressed. Since we have two genes here, the gene for wool color and then this gene that controls whether the color is even expressed, this calls for our favorite 16-square dihybrid cross. If you notice in this dihybrid, crossing two heterozygote llamas, any llama with big B and big B, little b will typically give a black llama, and little b will typically give a brown llama, in all cases unless they inherit a little c. If the llama has a little c in its genotype, then the gene for wool color is not expressed, and the llama is albino. This means that no pigment is expressed at all. Pretty interesting. There are many other non-Mendelian traits. We have another video on multiple alleles and a video on sex-linked traits. These are also non-Mendelian. It's kind of fascinating to see what can happen when you have these rule breakers. One last thing, keep in mind that when problem solving in genetics, you do not want to just assume it's non-Mendelian unless you are provided information or clues in the problem that it might be. Well, that's it for the Amoeba Sisters, and we remind you to stay curious.
Okay, so again, you might see these genotypes and phenotypes shown genotypes shown a little bit differently, but the interpretation is what matters. And for I just want you to kind of go with how I'm teaching you to write these genotypes, because that's the one you most often see. So for sweet peas here, right? The phenotype options that we have are red, white, and then that's pretty much it. So remember, the type of inheritance would just be dominant versus recessive, like we were saying before. So to do the dominant allele, you would just use the first letter of the dominant trait, right? So we would use a capital R. And then to do recessive, you would use the lowercase r. Okay, and the only way that you're going to show the white flowers is if you're homozygous recessive, right? Now that's for sweet peas. Now for camellias, let's take a look. So the possible phenotypes is we have red, we have white, and we have red and white. So in this case, this would be codominant because you see the both phenotypes being expressed, right? Like if you had a co-teacher, both teachers are teaching you. Now in this case, that prefix co means to to cooperate together. Both are being shown together. So in this case, we use superscripts, okay? So for this one, since we have flowers here, we are going to do, we could just do like the color of the flower. So how do I want to do that? We'll do like the petal. So the petal color, so I'll just do, or I could just do maybe like a P here. So for that one, red would be, you would be red. So the petal color, you'd be homozygous dominant for red, right? Now for white, for the petal, we would be homozygous dominant for white. Now for red and white, you would have one of each and you write them alphabetically as superscripts. Okay. Now let's look at our snapdragons. So phenotypes, we have red, we have white, and we have light pink. So in this case, this would be your incomplete dominance. Okay, and I'm not writing a definition because I'm kind of just telling you. So this is when, well, this would be both expressed. This would be like your blending or your mixture. Okay, so your blending results. So now if we're red, for this one we use all capital letters. So if you're red, you would be big R, genotypically speaking. If you're white, you'd be big W. And if you're pink, you would have an allele for each. So you'd be big R, big W. Okay, so we'll stop there for this part.